Hi, everyone. Harry here to talk about as bad a decision on the shadow docket as we've gotten from the U.S. Supreme Court, which has both grave consequences and is completely unexplained and cryptic. Okay, this is an Alien Enemies Act case. It's the case that involves the United States efforts to deport people to so-called third-party countries, not their own country, not countries where they've already established a well-founded fear of persecution, but yet another. And yesterday, the Supreme Court, with basically no explanation, removed a stay that a district court judge in Boston, Judge Murphy, had imposed on the administration, saying you may not do this unless you give them due process and permit them the opportunity to express and make their arguments of fear of persecution and the like, which they have been making. All right. So again, a really sort of cryptic, bare bones, less than bare bones opinion from the Supreme Court, lockstep 6-3, and an impassioned dissent by Justice Sotomayor that was joined by Jackson and Kagan. Let's take a step back now. The early litigation, remember, we had the big case in front of Boasberg that's still going on. That was a big one, and it involves a putative class as well of the people that they quickly and perhaps ignoring Boasberg's command, shuttled down to El Salvador. Then we had the Abrego Garcia case in front of Judge Zinnes, and she also found all this illegal conduct by the United States. This was the third in front of Judge Murphy, and it involves people going to, as I say, third-party countries. Now, a little confusing here, but Murphy first kind of takes charge of this area of the law with respect to someone who was improperly sent to Mexico. Shortly thereafter, we'll be talking about South Sudan. But just to remind you, there was a man from Guatemala. He's a gay man, I believe a gay hairdresser. OCG are his initials, and he is subject, by his allegations, to all kinds of persecution and, just basically brutal treatment because of his sexual orientation in Guatemala. He tries to escape to the United States, and he goes through Mexico. And in Mexico, he gets a whole new dose of, by his allegations, torture and kidnap and ransom and all kinds of persecution before he makes it to the United States. And on that basis, he wants to go. He is represented to the court. I don't want to go to Guatemala, fear persecution. Same thing with Mexico. Otherwise, they can deport me. Nevertheless, they deported him to Mexico, and his lawyer came in and said they did this even though he didn't want to go there. Judge Murphy at the time, fairly mild about it because the United States represented to him. He said, Judge Murphy, that he was okay or didn't have a fear of persecution of going to Mexico. And on that basis, Murphy issued no orders, but took some discovery. And that resulted in really a humiliating situation for the United States, where when push came to shove, turns out this had been confabulated. Nobody had any information, in fact, that suggested that he had said this, and it seemed to have just been made up, perhaps innocently, perhaps not. Anyway, at that point, Murphy hits the roof. Well, first, he really rhetorically just puts them through the ringer, the administration, and now he takes charge of this case. But at this point, we're talking about third-party countries and a plane of migrants that the administration does, to send to South Sudan. South Sudan's the youngest nation on earth, which is not a favorable distinction in this case. What it means is it's like barely a nation, barely has any kind of legal protection. It's sort of a nation on Tuesday and not on Wednesday. And people are subject to all kinds of shakedowns, torture, etc. But nevertheless, this is where the United States, in its pursuit of really hard-hitting policies against potential deportees, wanted to send folks. But Murphy, wise to what had happened with Boasberg, when the plane was in the air going to South Sudan, he said, stop the music now, either bring that plane home or keep it where it is and give them the process you have not so far. It turned out so far they'd given them a piece of paper in English saying you're subject to deportation and then, come right this way. And Murphy said, no, you've got to give them notice they can understand, and you got to give them a certain expansive time. And he declared what that would be. So that we've had the odd situation that a plane is on the tarmac in Djibouti in East Africa, and the administration has chosen to comply with the orders of Murphy, as far as we know, by bringing on interpreters and lawyers onto this plane and going through the whole process. And Murphy has permitted that. So he's done the basics of give them their basic due process rights, but he's hardly sort of, yanked them around and made life hard for them. He also, by the way, did say, bring back OCG, the gay hairdresser from Mexico, and they did. Okay. So that's where things stood. And in fact, they are going through and processing people in Djibouti on the plane based on his finding of a putative class. What that means is not going through the official class action criteria, but enough to order this relief of basically give them the minimum process that's due. Enter the Supreme Court and yesterday. And we have really, first, 6-3 lockstep. You have the 6 uber conservative majority as against Sotomayor, joined by Kagan and Jackson. And what the 6 say is, your guess is as good as mine, basically nothing. The order could not be more bare bones. It's not even fully bare bones, it seems to me. It simply says, the motion for relief in the United States has been submitted to the court. We grant it. And basically, no stay, Judge Murphy. We're eliminating and erasing what you did before, and it's going to stay that way until such time as, 1, the First Circuit, which has this case on the merits, decides it, and 2, we, the Supreme Court, either take the case or deny cert. So we're talking about a process now, if things don't change, could be a few months, could be literally 18 months or more, during which the protections that Murphy had ordered up are simply not there anymore. And you now have, it's quite clear that the administration wants to go back. Here's what the Department of Homeland Security says. DHS can now execute its lawful authority and remove illegal aliens to a country willing to accept them. And then with this triumphant, jingoistic, bad taste statement, fire up the deportation planes. Okay. So, and now to Sotomayor. Sotomayor, we're at the end of a term, and some of the most controversial opinions happen then. Those are in the regular course of business. This is the emergency docket. Even so, as she did last week on the bench, when she read from her dissent in the Tennessee transgender case, she ends with a real rhetorical flourish saying, this is, not respectfully I dissent, or respectfully and sadly, or, this is a tragedy because basically what the administration is now going to be able to do is a matter of life and death. When they send them to, say, South Sudan, especially without process, here's how Sotomayor puts it. Apparently, the court finds the idea that thousands will suffer violence in far-flung locales more palatable than the remote possibility that a district court exceeded its remedial powers when it ordered the government to provide notice and process to which the plaintiffs are constitutionally and statutorily entitled. So she says apparently because, as I say, it's completely cryptic. It appears, reading between the lines, that either the court thinks that the amount of time Murphy imposed is excessive, or possibly that the government has a good argument that they don't have jurisdiction, the district court doesn't, we do not know. But on that basis, the court could have concluded that the U.S., and this is the first factor in granting this kind of extraordinary stay, is likely to prevail on the merits. But there are 4 factors here, as Sotomayor is pointing out, and they include irreparable likelihood of success, most important, sure. But a challenger like the administration here has to show 3 more things. The irreparable injury, balance of equities with them, and the public interest. And irreparable injury, as contrasted with what could happen to the prisoners here as opposed to the United States just keeping them detained or giving them the relief that Murphy has ordered, it's really hard to see, and it feels as if maybe the court, as courts now do, it's a whole controversial area, we're slapdash in its application of the factors for a stay. So what do we got here? We got a Supreme Court case with high human stakes. We got a Supreme Court case with high political stakes and visibility, where people have looked at this and are aware of it. We got a Supreme Court case where they use the shadow docket, so they do it in a really both perfunctory and accelerated way. We got a case where they use the shadow docket with no explanation at all, not even a paragraph, as you do in other cases, explaining what their reasoning is. And we have a case where all that happens and the administration has behaved shabbily in the district court, and you would normally think the Supreme Court would have the district court's back and be able to say no. And what at least as Sotomayor, who is privy to more than we know because the majority is so curt and elliptical, says on the other side is something pretty modest. We don't even know yet. It'll be a while till we find out. So for my money, this has everything bad about shadow docket stuff, and almost a hyperbolic use of it with zero as in no explanation from the highest court in the land that owes its, political, owes its standing to acceptance by the public. We ought to have heard at a minimum why they were yanking the carpet out from under the plaintiffs and letting the U.S. Work its will. So that's how it stands now and how it's likely to stand for some time. And there will be human consequences, as Sotomayor says, and that is in 2025, the way it goes. Talk to you later. Thanks for tuning in. If you enjoyed this video and other Talking Feds content, please take a second to like and subscribe. Talk to you later.